welcome to our Sierra Community Conversations once again. I'm Steve Crowley, and I want to point out our production team of Robb Kidd, who's here, who will actually be a speaker tonight, and we will be welcoming three or four great speakers. Amy Shollenberger from Action Circles, Rebecca Ramos from the Necrasson Group, Falko Schilling from the ACLU, and our own Robb Kidd, who spent a lot of time in the State House working with legislators as lobbyists. And so we're really happy that they're here to give us some insight into that whole process. I should let everybody know this is being recorded. If you don't want your face to show up in any recording, you're free to hit the stop video, and you'll still be able to see, but that'll be closed off. And I will leave it to our panel to clue everybody in about how to participate in terms of chat and asking questions and so on. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Shollenberger from Action Circles. Amy, to you.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the panel, and I'm glad you all could join. I want to thank also our panelists, Rebecca and Falko and Robb, for taking the time to share some insights with you all. What we're planning to do is have a couple of rounds where the panelists share some thoughts, and then we'll take some questions. Then we'll do another round of tips and tricks and take a few more questions. And then we'll wrap it up. And we're heading into wrapping it up right at 8 o'clock. So you can type a question in the chat box if you think of one while folks are talking, and I'll keep track of that. And we'll also have a time where you can raise your little blue hand to ask a question as well. So we're going to kick it off with a first round of intros and top tips. And I see you on my screen, Rebecca, so I'm going to have you go first.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Ramos. I'm a contract lobbyist for a group called Necrasson Group. Before that, I've worked a lot as the chief of staff in the pro tem's office 2 terms, which is the president of the Senate. I worked for Howard Dean's 5th floor. The type of work that I'm an environmental lawyer, have lobbied for the Sierra Club. I do a lot of work with environmental groups, climate groups, affordable housing, conservation. So this is a group of people that I'm very familiar with and consider myself an environmentalist. So our firm has 35 clients. I do most of the environmental type work with it. And I'm honored to be here. Love the Sierra Club. I used to be on the executive committee in South Carolina. I don't know if you knew that, Robb. So I have been a member of the Sierra Club for 20 years. I understand there's all sorts of people with different experiences here from lobbying and advocacy. A lot of the work that I do is strategy with other advocates and work with other lobbyists. As someone who really only likes to work on things I'm passionate about or care about, it's always a good start when you're in the State House, and not everyone gets to do that. But I would say the thing that I think is that is most important is showing up as your authentic self with the relationships that you make. And this type of political work is about relationships. It is about getting to know people and understand people, understand legislators, understand what motivates them, and telling your story. So starting out with these just authentic relationship building is sort of a key aspect of what I do.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. And let's go to Falko and do an introduction and your top tip.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Falko Schilling. I'm the Advocacy Director for the ACLU of Vermont. And before that, I worked with Amy at Action Circles. So I get to meet some of you in that work, in our work with the Sierra Club. And at one point earlier in my career, I actually interned with the Necrasson Group at that point, Soraka and Necrasson. So you might hear some overlap in some of the tips and tricks, since these are folks that I've worked with quite a bit over the years. And just, the ACLU, we are a membership organization, and we advocate on civil liberties issues, largely focused on criminal justice reform. And thinking about the top tip or trick for tonight's discussion, I was trying to think of things that other folks might not bring up, because I know a lot of Amy's top tips and tricks and didn't want to steal any of those. And in thinking about where we are now, and especially the legislature in times of COVID, one thing that I think is really, really helpful and a great starting point for anyone who wants to get involved in the legislature, especially now, is really understanding how to navigate the legislative website. It is a super, super helpful source of information where you can find out what committee hearings are happening when. At this point, you can now find those committee hearings and watch them live. It can also take you to previous recordings. But it's also got a ton of things like reports from previous years, which can be really helpful in your advocacy, and how to contact folks. So learning how to use that tool is really helpful, especially understanding how to use it kind of in real time and figuring out what's happening. So that's one of my tips and tricks.
Great, thanks, Falko. And Rob, how about you?
Yes, so I'm Rob Kidd with the Vermont chapter of the Sierra Club, and as the staff lobbyist, one of the key things I'm going to say is the biggest help is working with everybody else, working with my fellow advocates, fellow lobbyists, because there's 150 representatives in the State House. There's 30 something senators, and it's impossible for one or even 10 people to cover the whole building, and to have those individual relationships. Even this morning, I was on a call with the Social Equity Caucus, and there was one representative who's been there for many years, and we got brought down in a breakout room, and he goes, "Rob, I've never talked to you before." And it was like, it's like, because I have never had the opportunity to work with this person. And it's just because he has been on judiciary and healthcare. That's not an area I've had to work with. So that's my number one tip, is working with fellow advocates, because as one person, it's hard to overcome. But as 10, 12, 13, 50, and then all the people who are behind me in this picture, working together for a common goal is my recommended top tip for people to follow. And then also for clarity, I got my start lobbying with Amy as an intern with rural Vermont. And then later on, I've lobbied with Falko on the GMO labeling bill when I was at rural Vermont as well. So we're all connected, and I talk to Rebecca all the time.
Vermont is a small town state. Hey, Rob, can you put it on gallery view for a second?
It should be.
Okay, I can't. It keeps popping back to speaker view for me. All right, so I just wanted to ask, since you heard who we are, who the folks are, and what their top tips are, I wanted to ask, you can raise your real live hand, or you can use your reaction buttons if you don't want to be on video, and raise your, whatever that's called, the waving hand. How many of you feel really confident if you had to go into the State House and lobby or advocate for a position with, let's say, a legislator you don't know? Okay, a few of you. And how many of you feel like, I'm not sure I'd be confident, but I would do it anyway?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. And anybody feel like, I'm not quite ready for that yet? Do we have any of those?
Can I a little bit more of an answer?
Yeah.
My complete answer would be, I would be very confident to go in and talk with somebody if I did enough research into the topic and felt like I really knew what I was talking about. Absent that, then I would not feel comfortable at all.
All right. Anybody else want to add a little flavor to their answer? All right, so for the next round, I'm going to ask folks on the panel to talk about, if you have to talk to a legislator you don't know yet, maybe a new person coming in, or just somebody you've never worked with, or maybe somebody who's usually on the other side, about an issue that you're working on. Do you have any advice for how to start that conversation or approach them or get ready for it? And Falko, how about you go first?
So in situations like that, one thing, this is kind of building off of Robb's tricks and tips. I often will try and talk to other folks who might have relationships with that person, just to find out a little bit more about them, you know, what they're like, what they might be interested in, any thoughts about the best time to actually approach them, because there's some people that, you know, you'll have some of that. But absent all of that, I think knowing your information is one of the most helpful things. And usually having something in hand to be able to give them and show them, I think is really helpful. Is something you can leave behind, something you can refer to. But then also just, you know, approaching them like they're any other person, being courteous, not trying to be super demanding, but trying to start a conversation, trying to find a time and place to talk with them that works for them, not trying to just force it into their schedule so you can check it off your list. But making sure that you're approaching them like you would any other person, trying to be courteous, and then making sure that you have your information, and then always knowing your ask, because sometimes when you're talking to someone new, you can get a little bit nervous, and making sure you know what is the one thing I need to do before I leave this conversation. Is that one thing I usually stick in my head before I talk to someone. It's like, I need to do this. Without that, I can't leave this conversation. So those are some of the things that I think about.
Thank you. And Rebecca, how about you?
So since I've been around a long time, I've had to do this a lot. And so so the first thing is that I always try to predict who I'm going to have to work with so that I can get to know them before I have to go engage with them. And so for some folks who are, so like for y'all, one of your your main person that you may need to be working with is your House member or your Senate member. So beginning to establish a relationship with them before you actually go lobby them or advocate for them is always a good start. And so this other thing about being authentic is when I go try to meet with legislators or get to know them, I actually am interested in who they are as people. Like I'm interested in what moves them and what motivates them and why they're there and why they ran. Running for office and being in office is really hard. Being a politician which is, you know, these are elected people who are citizens. They don't get paid a lot. They're there because they care about Vermont and Vermonters and their constituents. And so they have families and jobs and time is precious. And so I really try to understand, like, well, why do these people run? Why are they here? And so get to know them. And then what motivates them, right? I mean, like for all if you're working on climate change and this legislator doesn't care about climate, well, you have a lot of work to do with them about education and constituent work and all these things with them before you can get their vote on a yes on a climate bill. And so I know you're like, for some folks, I guess you guys are, you're just dropping in for your, hike the hill day, but in your communities, I'm getting to know your elected people, who they are, and in a very personal level.
Great, thank you.
I would just build off of that and say another thing I often will do is just, start by reading their bios. Everyone's bio is on the legislative website, and I've had times where I had to go approach someone. Just reading their bio and learning a little bit more about that person always makes me feel more comfortable, because it's they aren't just a name, they are a person. And so yeah, everything Rebecca said as well.
Well, and it's interesting. So like every year you get 30, 40 new members, and those are new legislators. They don't have a lot of, most of them, don't have a lot of experience. That is the best time to begin making relationships with legislators. So if in your district you have a brand new legislator, like email them, say congratulations. I'm your constituent. Let me tell you what, I hear you, like, what about this? I care about this. Can we talk? And they'll be so psyched. They'll remember like, oh, that's that constituent. That's that person that, got in touch with me. It is meaningful.
Rob, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I think is most critical is those personal relationships. Something that Amy taught me years ago is these legislators are people just like you and me. And they're not just some faceless entity. So connect in a relationship, even the ones that you may not necessarily like. I've actually gotten to be really friends with one of the most conservative members. And while he was there, and he voted against every single thing I believe in, and I still am friends with him. Now, I wouldn't have him over for dinner all the time, but I'm friends with him. So just get to know him on a personal relationship is what I say is really key.
We have some questions in the comments. I'm gonna do them a little out of order. So Sophia is asking, what's the most recurrent challenge you all face as lobbyists? And Rob, how about you go first?
Things change completely by the minute. Like whatever happened yesterday is old news, and next thing what happened today is new news. So it's finding out what is the current news, the current issue.
All right, Falko.
I'd say for me, and this is somewhat along the same lines, is having to be at least more than one place at once. I was joking with the folks in my office. I was saying I can only be two places at once. I can only be in a committee and answering your emails and doing other stuff. I can't be in two committees at once. So there's often so many different things you want to be covering in the State House, and the ability to be all those places at once is really difficult. So sometimes that you can help deal with that by building a network of other folks who might be in some of those committee meetings. It changes a little bit in the new virtual environment because you can at least go back and watch the recordings and catch up. And I find it really helpful to be able to watch those at a higher playback speed if I'm really behind on the hearings that I might have missed for the day. But when I was in the building, I think it's one, knowing exactly what's happening. So it's checking those schedules constantly, making sure you aren't missing things, and then figuring out how to prioritize where you should be when you're meant to be in multiple places at once, because that's often another challenge you face.
Rebecca.
Well, I love being a lobbyist. Like, I love my job so much, and I love the work that I do. I love the people. I love like the strategy and the creative pieces. And I'm sure like the folks who know me, like you know how much I love being at State House. So, what is hard is being in my house and not at the State House, number one, because my job, I don't lobby much anymore. Most of my job is I'm an information person. I get information, like I gather information, and then I share information. So like I'm all, and I get like I'm an information person and a strategy person, and getting the information in a timely manner that we can use it for our strategy to win is a lot of what I do. The COVID has made information gathering where I would see y'all like in this cafeteria, and Amy, you'd be like, oh, there's that thing that happened in Probst. Did you see it? I'll be like, oh, I missed that, but did you see that thing? And so it's something that would take 30 seconds in the State House takes an hour, because we're not seeing each other all the time, which is good. Like, so there's that. The pandemic has been a challenge for sure in the type of lobbying that I do. The other thing is that if you don't like chaos, or you don't like shifting grounds, or you don't like fires, don't do this work. Like the crazier it gets, the better I am. Like if the whole world's on fire, like that's when I excel, is when things are insane. Like that's why I love this job. If that doesn't feel good, that may not be like, right?
That is really true. I've had people work for me for a very short amount of time who just couldn't handle it.
It's crazy.
I'll just add one that people don't often think about when you're actually in the State House. Every seat in the building is uncomfortable and it drives me crazy. And that's my biggest challenge, is just sitting still in uncomfortable seats for hours at a time. And I actually really have to have a lot of strategies around how to deal with that. And so it's sometimes like the tiny little things that really get to you, because you have to be pleasant and you have to be paying attention, and you can't be thinking, you can't really sit with your feet up on the chair, because I tried it and got in trouble. Okay, here's another question in the comments. I have to scroll up. All right. This is about the budget. So COVID is sort of taking over everything and the budget. And also, like, everybody's thinking about it. And what about if you're trying to get money for something that's not related to COVID and maybe is sort of urgent, or important, but not urgent on the current pandemic scale? And Rebecca, you're nodding. How about you go first?
Oh, I do a lot of, I think all of us do money lobbying. So the one thing, like, people think lobbying, a lot of people think that lobbying is like a legislative thing. We call it the Capitol, because a lot of lobbying is in the administration, especially budget stuff. So before the legislature starts their budget, the governor's already written his, and so we start our budget work in September, October, so that the first trick is that if you can get your whatever you want into the governor's recommend, which is what we call the governor's budget, the governor's recommend, then it's a good place to be, because you're in the budget, and the legislature just works off the governor's budget. So you're up or down. They talk about being up or down based on the governor's recommend. And so we always try for our clients to get into the governor's recommend. If you're in there, then it's easier to stay in. It's harder to get in once the governor's already created, because he sent them this balanced budget, right? And so now you got to figure out whether it's 100,000 or 3 million. You got to go figure out where that money's coming from. Not that you do. We always say that's their job. We're bringing them a good idea, and we're trying to convince them to fund it. But so just understanding, like, the conversation really starts in the fall with the executive branch, and it's really hard. Money's hard. There are some things that are when there's a history, like we represent VHCC, which is Vermont Housing Conservation Board Coalition, which is housers and conservation groups and environmental groups. And we're like a 20-year train of like there's a pot of money that goes to building things. And so every year we have to come in. It's not our money. Every year we have to come in and say, here's the things that you invested in, and these are the results you're getting, and can we have some more? Brand new stuff. It ends up being tricky unless you have some corner office, which is the pro tem, the speaker, or the governor with you. New money's hard.
Okay, on that encouraging note, how about Falko?
Well, if you are not successful in getting in the governor's recommend, which is not the easiest thing to do, I will say that is if you aren't able to do that, don't think that you've failed out of the gate, because very few people are able to get new projects into the governor's recommend, especially in the current administration where so much of it's consistently level funded budgets. There are very few new initiatives, very few places of new spending. So one thing that I like to think about, and this is something that we did when I worked with Amy over at Action Circles, is building a team of folks who can help make your case within the legislative caucus. So not just lobbying the appropriations committee, but finding folks on the committee of jurisdiction over the issue you really care about, who would want to make that a priority within their budget recommendations to the appropriations committee. And then also just a number of other committed people who are willing to go bug the members of the appropriations committee and keep bugging them. Because it's one thing where some of our advocacy, we really have to focus it on specific committees. So like the Judiciary Committee or the Corrections and Institutions Committee, because so much of it is just people aren't going to really understand it. Whereas you can ask pretty much any legislator to go bug members of the Appropriations Committee and tell them, I want you to make this my priority. Some people might have things that are higher on their list and they say, look, I gotta save my powder because I gotta go ask for this thing I really, really want. I appreciate it. But building a group of folks who are committed to tracking something throughout the process and continuing to kind of bug the Appropriations Committee members and make sure that your ask is still top of mind and staying on the list is really important. And then the other thing I would say is utilize the public hearings when those are happening. Those are another great tool which help with prioritization. So if you can turn people out for the public budget hearings when they're happening, that's another way that you can help keep yourself in the mix on the budget discussion. Because in many ways, it feels like the budget is a series of hurdles and you just have to keep clearing them. If you don't make one, they say, well, it's off the list now. There's a bunch of hurdles. So keeping that pressure on and also, yeah, if you can get the governor's recommended, or you can get either the House recommended or the Senate recommended, that helps a lot. So getting in one of those is helpful.
And I'll add two quick things. One is right now the governor is taking comments on what he and his administration will be recommending, and I'll hunt down the link in a minute and put it in the chat. For that, you can take a survey and send comments directly to the governor. And the second thing I'll say is that on both the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Appropriations Committee, they divide up the budget so that a specific person is working on each section of the budget. And that person in that committee then makes recommendations to the the rest of the committee about what they think is the most important thing. And so finding out whatever you're advocating for, who is the person on the Appropriations Committee that covers that section of the budget, and making sure that you're talking to them to make the case, because otherwise, they might just think, oh, well, that's a request, but I don't really know a lot about it, so I'm not going to recommend it. So that's another tip. And those, the list is usually posted right on the committee webpage. You have to hunt around for it a little bit sometimes, but it's usually there. Okay, I have a couple of questions about facts. So you guys can read in the comments if you want the details, but really the question is about, like, how important are the facts? How do you use them? What happens if somebody is presenting the wrong information in a committee hearing? How important is that to try to counter it? How prepared, like if I'm meeting with a legislator, is it all about all the information, and what's the balance there? So who wants to go first?
I'll go. And this answer, I might butcher a quote from Amy, which was one of my favorites. That I remember when I first started working with Amy, we were having a conversation about all of this, and she told me, you got to have the facts, but the facts don't matter. And because so much of what you're doing when you're talking to legislators is telling them a story, because that's what people remember. People remember the story of what you're trying to accomplish. And they also remember the anecdotes, and those can often be part of the story. And that's usually how you get that initial buy-in. But after that, that's when you're going to need the facts. Once you have them bought in to what you want to get done, they will keep coming back to you and asking me, like, wait a minute, I got one more question about this, or I don't fully understand it. So I think often in some of those conversations, the facts are important to have on your side, but they're not usually what I try and lead with. I try and lead with values, and try and lead with a positive vision for what we could accomplish working together. And then after that, once they get bought in, that's usually when they start caring more about the facts. And that's often when Amy and I would give them a fact sheet that they could hang on to because they would forget about it. And then usually have to give them at least two more because they would then, they drop it somewhere and stuff like that. So facts are very important, but often those aren't what motivate people. People are motivated by stories, they're motivated by values, they're motivated by emotions. And so that's usually what I try and lead with, but the facts are still incredibly important, and you can't really win without them on your side in the end is what I found, though that not always.
Rebecca?
So,
And do you want to also address that question about like, what if somebody's saying something incorrectly?
mhm. So our part of what we are trying to do is, I don't know, there's a difference between like a constituent coming to talk to their legislator who's their person, like, you know, like, and you going to tell your legislator, this is something I care about, I want you to support it, is you need to have your story and tell your, you know, have your information right, tell your stories, stay truthful and with integrity. However, if you're coming up to the State House and it's not the person, your legislator, but it's new people, or, you know, like how we work with people every day, the reality is there is an expectation that whatever we're saying is truthful all the time. So like there's a lot of, I know people sometimes, lobbyists are, you know, not truthful and they're not respectful and there's no integrity. In our little town, those people don't last long, because once you have no credibility, you're gone. It just doesn't. And so much about credibility is important. The facts question is, if you have a great fact, if you have like a great fact, like dogs are dying in Lake Champlain, right? Like that is a story, that is a fact, that's going to lead to investments in water quality, which took a long time, I understand. But there are sometimes a fact is so like crazy and that tells the story for you. But often, you know, I rarely talk about facts. Like they're not the work that I do. There are often my clients are the substance folks. And so I am, you know, creating the environment for the facts to be told. But I definitely agree with Falko that you have to, you know, in our office, we talk about, you know, like understanding what is happening on the political landscape right now. I bet we could all identify like what are the general five things this session we're going to be talking about, right? We all have a sense, because we've been around, what those things are. And so when we come and talk to a legislator, we're also trying to help them solve their problems, right? And so if the thing that I want, or the thing that you as an advocate want doesn't relate to anything in this person's world or that they care about, you can have all the facts and all the story you want. It's going to be really hard to connect with them. And so, you know, once again, understanding your legislator, understanding what's the topic going on. I mean, definitely there's ways to talk about things in relation to, like we work on childcare. Childcare has become really important in this pandemic, way more than people understood a year ago. But so we're using the political environment, which is this COVID space, to really reemphasize the importance of childcare. So use your political environment.
And I just going back to your question about what happens when someone isn't telling the truth, I think that's something that I usually have to judge based on how big of a lie it is and how important it is. Because if it's just something that someone got wrong, that no one's paying attention to, and they've passed over it and they aren't thinking about it anymore, sometimes I'll just let it go because I don't want to draw more attention to it. That gives it more air, that makes it a bigger thing. But if it's a really fundamental issue that could impact how people are deciding on the bill, when we were in the rooms, some people will be very vocal or like fidgety or just like harumph to try and let people know that they have an issue with it. Sometimes it's just body language. I do not recommend that. I remember, you know, one thing that's really important in the State House, and I think people really appreciate, is the people who can keep their game face on. And then what you would do afterwards when you're in the building is then go up to the chair or someone and say, I want to let you know what you just heard. There's problems with this. This is what the actual facts are. I can give you something on this. Or in a digital environment, what I've done is just follow up with follow-up information. Be like, I just want to correct some of the testimony that you heard today, so you don't go forward with some incorrect information, and you provide citations. But it is kind of a judgment call because you don't need to be right all the time. You know, that's one thing that I find there's some people who operate in the building, they have this need, they need to be right every single moment of every single day, and they need to make sure everyone knows that they're right all the time. And that is often not helpful. And especially if someone's doing something, they're saying stuff that might not be true and no one's paying attention, they've kind of written them off. Let that be. Move on, keep saying what you want to say, and don't waste your energy on someone else unless it's really important or it makes the conversation take a turn in a really bad direction.
Yeah, and I want to add on about knowing the facts, and still, even if you're asked the facts in these conversations, is a lot of times a legislator will ask somebody a question about such a topic, and I've heard it so many times somebody will flub the answer, or they'll talk about something they don't know. I actually find it better, more helpful to be like, admit, I don't know that answer, but I'll get you somebody who knows that answer, or I'll find that, and it helps build that further relationship even better. Like, I've done it with so many times where it's just I'll send them the document like a day later to say, hey, here's what you asked me for. I didn't know about it, and then they'll ask me for something later.
Great. Jack Cushman, do you want to unmute and clarify what your question is about the news media? You're muted still.
Sorry about that. Those who know me know that I spent my whole career as a newspaper reporter. I'm new both to Vermont and to activism. But when I was a journalist, I spent a lot of time working with lobbyists because I could find out information from them and they could find out information from me. It was kind of a symbiotic relationship without regard to which side they might be lobbying on or what they thought I might be writing. And so I'm interested to hear at the scale of Montpelier or the town of Norwich, what are your perceptions about the sophistication of the press corps here, which impresses me quite a bit, and the utility of advocates working with the press?
Let's see. Rob, do you want to go first?
Well, yeah, that's one of the things I see as very critical is Jack, you were involved with the conversation we had with Pete Hirschfeld and Ann Galloway. And, having the relationship with them is very critical because we need them to actually be able to get the story and give them truthful information. We don't want to give them something that's going to waste their time and send them a wild goose chase that's not going to be newsworthy or anything else. So I see the relationship building that we have with the press is just as helpful as we are with the advocates. As you know, you had a hard time getting through to Ann Galloway, and I just texted her, and she responds to me because she knows what I have is going to be viable information.
Yeah, now Ann and I are in constant communications. Thanks, Rob.
All right, Rebecca, do you want to add something?
Sure. So we do a lot of legislative campaign work, so that we're doing like the climate stuff or the child care. We worked on all the marijuana reform, gun safety. So we work a lot on we call them like campaigns for change, and we work a lot with the media. We have campaign communications plans. A lot of our campaign folks have comms people. I work a lot on helping getting messaging right. Sometimes this stuff is paid, sometimes it's earned, sometimes it's all sorts of things. I believe we believe deeply in journalism and the need for a free and fair press, and to support it. My experience is that especially if you're trying to create an authorizing environment, that's the term that we use for like when we first started doing gun safety stuff 6 or 7 years ago, there was not an authorizing environment for any change on guns. at all. And so we had to spend like the first year or two creating a space where people could get to say yes to some type of change. And a lot of that had to do with the work with the media, in the press, with polling, with activists, with constituent work, and all that is, like if the press writing about our stories, telling our stories about why we need gun safety, talking about the harm that's happening, that helps tell the story of why we have to have change. If you can't tell the story of why we need change and the press isn't interested or they're not engaging on it, you're not going to be able to, legislators, especially on big stuff, they're going to need cover. They're going to have to understand that, oh yeah, we need to do something about that. I see that, oh, I get it now. And so, so we work a lot on communications and messaging and working with the press.
Yeah, I will say just quickly, one thing that is a little bit different in different roles that I've had within the State House. As a contract lobbyist, a lot of what we're doing is really teeing things up for our client. So making some of that initial contact with a member of the press, helping them strategize who the right person to bring the story to would be, what the right outlet is, when we really want to push that. And then, prepping our client to be able to have that conversation. Whereas in my current role as the advocate on behalf of the ACLU, I am now the one who's having to do that and then go into that interview myself and make sure that I'm prepped. So that is something that is a little bit different. And I will say it's been something that I've had to get used to again, having to be the one who has to, after doing all that legwork, then has to make sure that I'm on my talking points and know what I'm saying. But I agree with everything Rebecca's been saying. It's incredibly valuable to have good relationships with reporters. And I can think of times when I've talked to a reporter for a half hour on background just because I'm following a committee that they haven't had time to really sit in on. And even and often I'll maybe get one quote or no quote in something like that just because they feel a little guilty of how much they picked my brain, but that means they're going to come back to me in the future. Similar to legislators, knowing that you're a reliable source of information that can help them get a story done when they're under deadline, they're really crunched and they know they can come to you. That means they're going to come back to you in the future, and maybe also be a little more receptive to some of your pitches that might be a little bit more out there if they have that trust with you. So, building those relationships is so valuable. And as Rebecca says, it can really change the environment. I think especially, this is something I've noticed in my work with the ACLU, the press is one of the best tools we have to push legislative change, because when our issues are coming up in the press, it does create that enabling environment. And they're on really tough issues that might not be as easy to do grassroots organizing around. These are hard subjects. And some of the people we're advocating for might not be the most sympathetic people sometimes, but by working with the press and thinking about how you tell that story and how to humanize people, you can make some really big change happen. I think we saw that happen this last year, where because of really strong reporting, it created a frame where legislators felt that they had to act on a number of different issues. And so it's a great tool and one you really shouldn't neglect.
I would just underscore some of what Falko just said. One thing is the advantage to a journalist of having somebody who is in the room all the time is very significant, but it relies on trust that person in the room is giving you an unvarnished view, because it's not the press's job to be the advocate in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very complex symbiotic relationship, which involves the legislator, the advocate for the other side, the journalist, and the reading public. And so in that relationship, always take a minute and respect the vantage point of the working journalist who's trying to perform her function or his function just as much as what your agenda is.
I'm going to add just one thing that I think is really important when you're working with the press, is that you have to know what is news. So I work a lot of times when we're working with clients, they're like, well, we want a story on this, whatever this is not news. It's really important to you. It's maybe a very urgent issue. It's maybe super interesting to you, but it's not news. So you have to really think about you know, it actually helps to read the news, not just CNN, but, you know, the Times Argus, the Burlington Free Press, the Brattleboro Reformer, so that you can see how these different papers and the different journalists cover things and what's interesting to them and what's interesting to their readers. Because I can't tell you how many times a reporter has said to me, yeah, come back to me when it's actually news. You know, that's great. I got it. It's interesting. Tell me when something happens. And so I find a lot of my job is to create a news hook. So creating a situation where something actually happens and then telling a reporter that it happened is a lot of sort of the work that we do with the media. So just thinking about having that perspective. Rob, do you want to add anything on this one?
No, thanks, Amy.
All right, so I have a lot more questions and we don't have a lot more time. So I'm going to ask like 3 questions all at once, and then you guys can pick which one you want to answer or answer all of them. So there's a question about, I've heard everything happens in the last 2 weeks. Is that true? There's a question about how hard is it to just add something to a bill? And then there's a question about how much polling gets used in the state of Vermont and how important it is. So how about Falko, you go first.
So I guess I'll start with what happens when, and does everything happen in the last 2 weeks? In some ways, the last 2 weeks are when it feels like sometimes are fewer things happening, because at least for me, usually at the beginning of the session, there's so many different bills in play, so many different things that you're trying to cover, that a lot is happening right at the beginning. And because of the time constraints of the legislature, when you realize something isn't getting airtime, you know it's going to kind of fall by the wayside. There's definitely a lot that happens in the last 2 weeks, but it's usually a lot of the big decisions about what the kind of the arc of the session is going to look like. What are the big issues that people are going to be working on? You learn more of that in the first half as you're heading into the town meeting break. And then I mean, especially budget stuff, there's a lot that happens right at the end and in conference committees, but there's things that are happening throughout the entire session. And if you just want to show up for the last 2 weeks, you're definitely going to be way too late. A lot of that building to being able to still be in play in the last 2 weeks is what you're doing the whole session. You want to have a lot happening in the last 2 weeks, but that requires a lot of work up front. I'm trying to remember what the other questions were.
How hard is it to add something? And
how hard is it to add just something to a bill? That really depends. It depends on how big a thing you want to add is, whether it's controversial, and who you're asking. Are all different things that, if you're asking a chair and they think, oh, that's no big deal, and they have their committee's ear and they can just kind of push it through, that's easy. If you have someone who is maybe seen as putting forward the most controversial proposals within a committee, and they want to try and throw something in the last minute, that's not going to usually work as well, if at all. But in some, this can happen really easily. There was a bill I was working on this last year, which ended up making Vermont the first state in the nation to ban the use of law enforcement technology using facial recognition. So law enforcement using facial recognition technology. That got in a bill simply because, as I was testifying, someone asked me like, hey, on your platform, you say we should do this. What does this mean? And I explained it. And then the next draft of the bill, it was just in there. And my executive director kept asking me like, how did we get that in there again? I'm like, I testified, I said they should do it, and then it was in the next draft of the bill, and we didn't draw any attention to it, so no one noticed, and then it passed. And so sometimes it can be easy, sometimes it can be really hard.
All right, Rebecca.
So about polling, so polling costs money, and so a lot of times the folks who do polling are folks either like national level folks who have the cash to do that, or folks that are working in coalition, so because you can put your money together, or you're doing a big campaign. So we end up doing a lot of polling just because of we're working with lots of coalitions, or we're working on with like national level groups. Or we're working on something that's so new, we have to give so our firm did end of life choices, and Amy, you were on that with Adam years ago. So like we had to find out where is, like 15 years ago, like where is people out? Where is everyone on that? So like sometimes you just have to do a poll in the very beginning to understand just like where is everyone and what do people think about it before you can even begin your strategy on it. So polling is useful, depends on, you know, where you are in your campaign and what you're trying to achieve. The last 2 weeks of session are my favorite because remember, I loved the chaos and the burning fire and things like melting down, and that's when all that happened. So I'm all about the last 2 weeks of the session. But Falko's is definitely right. If you're still alive in the last 2 weeks of the session, then it's because you've been working really hard to stay alive. That said, when I was a staff person, I hated the last 2 weeks of the session because that's when the shit would just go crazy and you had the control. There was no control anywhere. And so, like trying to control that was a problem. It's much more fun as a lobbyist, honestly. And then add something to the bill. That's like a game, right? I mean, like adding something to a bill. I know it's not fun. It's not okay to talk about this as a game. I understand that, but it's also super fun to see if you can pull it off. And if you're able to, if it's a cool thing that you got your chair on or the speaker wants, or, you know, like somebody with a lot of power influence wants, it's easier to do. But most people don't like to do it. Most legislators don't like to do it because they actually believe in the political process and they don't like to usurp that. And so years ago, like there used to be a lot of like, let's just put it in the budget, putting policy in the budget or slipping things in here. It's really frowned upon right now. And unless it's like something that has been vetted or understood, it's not, you know, which is too bad sometimes.
Depends which side you're on.
I know.
Rob, do you want to add?
Yeah, so I'm going to add on to it. To say where you can add things onto a bill, there are some committees where there's bills that are directly known as Christmas tree bills, where they basically collect everything. As Rebecca says, sometimes those are very much frowned upon, but a committee like the Transportation Committee, basically generally you have the whole bill, the committee passes the transportation bill, where every policy that members of the committee are very much interested in or knowing. Then also Amy just put in the chat box, omnibus bills. That committee will have everything, but really that's going to be the prerogative of the chair or key committee members. So if you have if you're not in with the chair or you're not in with key leaders, to get one issue added to it, it's not going to be easy. It's not as easy, or it could be just something somebody really wants to get through. Like I know in the transportation bill last year, there was some issues that one of the more conservative members wanted to pass for his district. And, you know, the chair was like, okay, I'll give him something just to make him happy that it got included in that. And then it goes on in the whole process. But generally, I don't see it as like adding things that are already set are very difficult. Now, one I want to say is one experience is about the last 2 weeks. I've seen things added into a bills that were completely 100% dead. And so you can't just always be like, okay, my issue has died. I got no hope. And one of the key pieces of legislation that I ever worked on was when I was with VVSR, and they passed the farm to plate legislation, and Vince Aluzzi added that onto the economic development bill, I think literally in conference committee at the end of the session. And I kept telling Andrea, who was the lobbyist at the time, was like, no, it's dead. It's not going anywhere. And all of a sudden it got added back on, and that became a famed program throughout Vermont. And it was basically added right at the last second. So it can happen.
Right. And then, but you can end up like completely, if things become too not germane to the original part of the bill, you can get up. There's a lot of, so we haven't really talked about what happens on the House and Senate floors. And if things get added to the bill that aren't really germane to the bill, those things can get stripped out on the floor because of rules, like on the House or Senate floor because of rules, which is a big bummer because you did all this work to get it in, and then all of a sudden, like, there it goes. Because
So I just want to say that Farm to Plate got in there because of a lot of work that we did earlier in the session to set that all up. So Senator Aluzzi was pretty famous for adding things to the bills and conference committees, but there was a lot of work by a lot of people to get that set up as well. So we're at 7:55. I know Rob needs a few minutes, so I'm going to do lightning round, last comments, very quick, and then we're going to hand it back to Rob to make his announcements. And I'll just say, I saw there's a few other questions in the comments. I think we can address those at the Monday training. So if people want to come back to the training, we can circle back to some of these questions. Okay, Rebecca, go.
I just would say, like, I think the more people advocating on environmental issues or really any issues, the more the merrier. And I'm excited to see y'all on Zoom or come on up to Montpelier, because it is, participating in the legislative process is really important to our democracy.
I will add, I guess, one quick tip or trick that I didn't get in the beginning. This is something that took me a while to learn. If there's a committee that you're going to be spending a lot of time in, or you anticipate spending a lot of time in, get to know the committee assistant and be on their good side. They are a really, really valuable resource. They can let you know when things are coming up, and they'll make sure that the chair is, when you're sending messages that the chair might have ignored, you can send one to them and they'll make sure that they sort of lift it up. And then they can also help you get on the witness list or schedule witnesses you want. But they're a integral part of the legislative process that I think a lot of people outside the building are not aware of and don't know how critical they are to keeping everything running. So that's just another quick tip or trick.
Rob, it's all you.
Okay, so I'm going to end it now, I guess, but I want to actually put in the other tips, as actually Amy just referenced and Rachel put it in the chat line. Is we do have a legislative training coming up on Monday, December 7th, and for those of you, I will email that to everybody on this list. So that's actually hosted by Action Circles with us. And so if you want to join that particular conversation, but then also we have another conversation trainings by Sierra Club National next Wednesday at 8 p.m. or next Sunday, December 13th at 1 p.m. And this is actually about how to testify and how to learn the skills of being able to testify within a public hearing type setting or within a legislature. This one is actually operated by our Sierra Club National folks. You'll be with people all across the country. So it's not going to be geared towards Vermont, but the training with Amy will be geared towards Vermont legislature directly. But then also we're going to do the first week of January, January 6th, we're going to do a climate and environmental justice legislative preview. We're going to have some of our other fellow environmental advocates talking about what we expect. Then as well, on the following, we're going to talk particularly about the transportation bill. There's a whole line of climate measures that are going to be in that particular piece of legislation. So those are all coming up, but anything on our particular website, all the conversations we do are posted on the sierraclub.org. /Vermont, and then also our recordings and any of our upcoming events are all listed on there. And so thank you very much for Amy for leading us in this conversation and putting together Falko and Rebecca for joining us. Also, Steve forgot to mention that Rachel Stevens, our chapter chair, joined on the conversation in the middle. And thanks, Steve, for starting this off, and Jack Cushman, who's been helping us produce these conversations, and Scott Weathers, who's been helping us with our grassroots network program, which is putting on our trainings with Action Circles. So thank you very much for your time. And